So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where Russia and the United States swap places. So this is a pretty interesting idea. Russia and the United States will be completely swapping places. Now what I mean by that is not the actual land masses will be swapping places, but instead all of the people, the military, the government, they will be swapping places. So everyone in America will be going to Russia and everyone in Russia will be going to America. Obviously this drastically changes geopolitics. It changes like the strategies of these countries, and it even changes the purposes of whole entire alliances. So if you do enjoy today's scenario, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All the support is greatly appreciated. And let's go ahead and jump straight into the scenario. Alright, so like I said, Russia and the United States will be completely swapping places. So this is now America and this is now Russia. This has huge effects on the world, of course. The United States now borders one of its largest enemies, actually two of them, being China and North Korea. It's only a few miles away from Iran, whereas Russia now shares the long border with Canada, but borders allies such as Cuba and is very close to Nicaragua. Venezuela is also in the region, and Russia now has the ability to influence pretty much all of South America. Whereas for the United States, they of course already influence Europe in real life, but now that influence is even stronger, and they can even start to try to influence the Middle East and Central Asia, maybe even Southeast Asia and Africa. So what effect does this have on NATO? So let's take a look at the map of NATO. This is what it looks like currently, but now we need to add in the United States. And this is what we're looking at. It's a little bit scary. Now remember, the military swap places, so technically the US is still the strongest country in the world. 330 million people here compared to, what's the population of Russia? Only 144 million? I thought it was like 200 million something. So that's a huge difference. But hey, maybe Russia is more used now, you know, maybe there's more people living out here. But one thing's for sure is that the population density is relatively going to be the same. So for example, in Russia, a lot of people live over here in the west of the country near Moscow, and in the United States, a lot of people live on the coastal areas. So that's the same here. The Russians that move to America will mostly be on the coastal areas, and the Americans that move to Russia will mostly be in the western part of that country. But now let's get to the interesting stuff: geopolitics and war. Obviously NATO kind of loses its purpose because Russia is no longer a threat to Europe, it's more of a threat to the Americas. So maybe we see a new alliance pop up, or maybe we see the consolidation of NATO. This basically means that hey, there's no one here to stop Ukraine from joining, and there's no one here from stopping Georgia from joining. No one is going to stop Azerbaijan from joining. Moldova is allowed in now, and the rest, well, the rest are an interesting scenario. Without Russia in the region, it's highly plausible that Serbia experiences a election result they don't expect, and a certain Mr. Democracy gets into power and he recognizes Kosovo, and then we have Kosovo joining NATO, and maybe even the Serbian leader that just got elected totally illegally even flips the country to a NATO country. That doesn't fix all the problems, but it does definitely help, because then Bosnia and Herzegovina could come into NATO, and the other countries in Europe are neutral, so they don't really care. That is except for Belarus. They would most likely want to stick with Russia, even though they are now thousands of miles away. So Russia and Belarus form the CSTO. So let's go ahead and also add in the other CSTO countries. But there is one issue, and that is that Armenia actually left the CSTO in real life, or is in the process of leaving the CSTO in real life. If you remember a few months ago, I did talk about how their leaders had a fallout, and Armenia no longer felt like they're connected to Russia, so they left CSTO. They might start to try to improve relations with the West, but the only issue with that would be Turkey. We know the history between these two. But with Armenia gone, the other members are now Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So this is a relatively weak alliance, but now that they've swapped places, it gives way for more countries in the Americas who were previously kind of held down by the US to go ahead and join up with Russia. So this is going to be Cuba, it's going to be Nicaragua, and it's going to be Venezuela. These are three countries in the Americas who are not very pro-American and are much more pro-China or pro-Russia. Another country that could easily fall under Russia's influence in this scenario is Haiti, who doesn't have a government currently. Russia could easily just send their troops into there, set up a new government, and basically make it into a puppet. And I wouldn't be surprised if the US actually ends up doing that in real life. But with Russia in the driver's seat of influence in the Americas, it's likely that, you know, some countries like Mexico, some countries like Brazil, even down here in southern South America, these guys would start to lean towards the Russians instead of the Americans. Whereas the same thing could be said over here in the Asian continent. India is pretty split in real life. I would say it's about 55% in support of Russia, 45% in terms of America. And that's not talking about like population. I'm more so concerning to like politics and stuff. Even Pakistan, who is, you know, very anti-India, is they used to be at least pretty split between Russia and the US. Now it's more so between China and Russia. The US has lost any ground here, and that's mostly because they left Afghanistan. But yeah, you know, maybe they start gaining that influence back over Pakistan. They can definitely do some funky stuff in the Middle East since, you know, they're right there. You know, maybe influence some elections. But I think the most interesting country here would be Egypt. Now, in real life, Egypt holds pretty strong relations with both the US and Russia. And both of those connections are military. So Egypt is playing both sides in real life. But now with Russia across the ocean, they don't really offer too much other than what America offers to them in real life. And, you know, maybe the US can start influencing Egypt a little bit more than Russia did. And that's because, of course, the US is stronger, more people here, bigger government. Basically, the US just moves this whole operation over to this side of the world and has the same amount of influence that it had over here. Once again, it's just a complete swap of people. So would any wars break out from this? Most certainly, because this would obviously, I mean, look at it. This is going to lead to war. How did Russia and the US switch places? That's not even possible. I mean, of course they're going to fight each other about it. But right now, these sides are not fair at all. So let's make it a little bit more fair. North Korea will join in Russia's alliance, and so will China, a big player in this war. This is obviously going to frighten NATO, who's going to go ahead and start sending out applications for more countries to join. These countries are going to include Israel, which might be a little bit controversial for some of these countries, but hey, at the end of the day, you get Israel on your team. So, I mean, they don't do good things, but hey, they're strong. At least that's what the media says. They would also most certainly get South Korea in on this, and also the Philippines. We can also see Australia and New Zealand join in, and that's solely because of their issues with China. Now, I usually depict Japan as having a military, and I'm going to be doing that here too, but do note in real life, Japan doesn't really have an active duty force. They are solely, or not solely, but they're pretty much just protected by the United States. There's also a lot of key role players in Southeast Asia. We'll get to that later. There's also a lot of role players in the Middle East. Now, I'm not too sure about Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. I think they might stay neutral here. Turkmenistan is a very interesting country. Read up on it if you haven't. But other countries that would most certainly join in on Russia's side include Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. And you can make a case that Yemen would want to get involved as well. But for the most part, these other countries are going to stay out of the war because, I mean, look, the Northern Hemisphere is about to throw hands with itself. Anyway, let's get to the actual fighting. So, how does it start? I'm actually not entirely sure. I'll leave that to you guys to figure out, but the fighting will start on the border of Iran. Nope, just kidding. It's happening over here. Somewhere, somehow, North Korean troops enter up into the United States. That's obviously an act of war. So China starts to freak out. They're like, hey, why did you do that? And North Korea's like, what? And China's like, all right, you know what? Let's just go for it. So China just starts invading the United States. And obviously this will activate NATO. And China will claim that, hey, the US set up this false flag thing. We need help. And of course, their allies are going to listen to them. So the red team and the blue team are now at war. I do apologize if I sound like I'm like overly energetic. It's because I'm tired, which is a weird effect. To be so tired that you become energetic is truly an interesting feat. But I haven't slept in about almost 36 hours. And I did a long 4-hour stream earlier. That was not fun. I mean, it was fun. Just going through a stream extremely tired for 4 hours, that's kind of draining. But to the more interesting stuff, Kazakhstan is getting absolutely demolished by the United States at this point. They really can't fight back at all, and they're not even going to see any resistance until they get to the border of China. Now here might be an interesting part because of the Uyghur stuff that happens over here. So Xinjiang either will close their doors and boo the Americans out, or they might welcome them with open arms. I have a feeling that it would probably not be the latter. So, I mean, there's no uprising here. It's just more of like, oh, yay, a new dictator to rule over us. But the US starts making steady progress into China until eventually they don't. The Chinese military finally responds, and the Americans are pushed way back out of China and into Kazakhstan. Now, in terms of sheer manpower, China has a large advantage. I think the US's military total is like 3 million compared to China's probably 4 million, and that's including reserve, National Guard, active duty. And let's not forget the population of China is a steady 1.4 billion, which, you know, is a lot more than just 333 million. But another thing we need to factor in is the other stuff that's not on the ground, like Air Force and Navy. The US has a far superior Air Force and Navy, and their naval air force is also insane. So assuming that they have those here, because why wouldn't they? They're probably most active in the Sea of Japan, completely obliterating North Korea from the ocean. It's likely that North Korea would pretty much fall almost instantly, which would lead to the invasion of China from there. But China would quickly notice that and just completely go right back into North Korea, just like in the Korean War in the 50s. I think this war would actually kind of motivate Taiwan to join in and just kind of settle the whole who's the real China debate. Whoever wins this war gets to be the real China. But a very large naval battle ensues over here in the Pacific. Meanwhile, over in the Americas, it's not looking too good for the blue team. Russian troops storm up into Ontario and quickly take their capital with ease. Ottawa falls within weeks, and this Canada, I kind of feel bad. Canada is always getting blitzed in my videos, and we all know why. The population thing, right? Also, Canada's population total is like 35 million. I am wrong, it's more like 40 million, but the second largest country in the world only has a population of 40 million. The largest country in the world only has a population of 100 something million. The third largest country has 330 something million, and then the fourth largest, has 1.4 billion. So there's obviously some weird numbers happening here. Canada likely won't surrender to Russia. I know that I usually have them surrender to the US, but that's because they share a common ideology. In this case, Russia is just a pure enemy. They don't share much in common at all. They don't have any history together. So Canada is a lot more reluctant in surrendering over to the Russians. However, there is one factor that is not good for Canada, and that is the fact that Canada has very harsh winters. We all know the Russians and winter, they go well together. So instead of, suffering like any other country would do, Russia has a lot of ease going through Canada, even during their cold seasons. Canada holds out though. They still don't surrender, even though all of their population at this point is under the control of Russia. The US tries to get some countries over in the Americas to join up in the war, but unfortunately for them, their influence has essentially faded at this point, and no country is willing to join the war for them. Another thing to think about here is like Costa Rica. They don't have a military, and they're also protected by the US as well as Panama. So how exactly does that work, being, that far away? It would likely lead to these guys having to raise up their own armies, which could go horribly depending on how you address it. Countries have collapsed in the past because of things like that happening too sudden. So yeah, just be wary about that, you two awesome Central American countries. Let's now go ahead and peek over to the Middle East. Lebanon and Syria are understandably wiped out pretty quickly. And as for the rest of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia is pretty split between the US and Russia. Yemen obviously does not like Saudi Arabia, and Yemen also doesn't like the US. So it kind of brings the Saudis and the Americans a little bit more closer than the Saudis and the Russians. And once again, that's because of a common enemy. And with the US closer now, they would have a lot more influence over Saudi Arabia directly. But even as I say that, I do still think they stay out of the war because they're not directly provoked by anybody. Same thing with Iraq. I honestly don't know about Iraq in real life. I've heard that they're both neutral toward the US, but also hateful toward the US. I mean, I understand being hateful toward the US because of what they did, but I don't know. I've heard things from both sides, so I'm not sure. Any Iraqis want to help me out? Over now to Central Asia. We need to talk about these guys. India obviously is going to stay out of the war. There's no benefit for them in joining this. They would have to fight China and Pakistan. That's not a good duo to go up against, but you do have geography on your side, so who knows, maybe they'd be able to hold it out. But now looking ahead into the future a little bit, China will continue to expand their gains over here, where the US does not have a lot of personnel. Meanwhile, the Korean Peninsula battle will be continuing going back and forth, but advances elsewhere are made. China sees a lot of success in Central Asia, pushing back the Americans and getting them even closer to their own border. But NATO does have one trick up their sleeve, and that is the recruitment of Vietnam into the war, using them as a staging ground to start an invasion into southern China. Now, in the olden days, this would actually work, but nowadays technology is so good that China would have seen this coming months in advance. But due to the fact that that's boring, we're going to be ignoring that, and the surprise attack is going to work, and hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of troops start to spread up into southern China, liberating areas such as Hong Kong. Taiwan starts to send personnel in, and China is now a little bit worried about their losing front in the south. But don't worry, they have a trump card. And that card is of course Cambodia and Laos. These two countries who are fairly communistic. Cambodia isn't, but Laos is. So China has a lot of ease in recruiting them. They also recruit Myanmar. They might have had something to do with the coup that took place there. But Myanmar isn't really too much of a threat on its own because of how weak it is and unstable it is. So while the additions of Cambodia and Laos do pose a little bit of a challenge for the NATO guys, in the end, they really don't do too much damage, and NATO mostly just focuses on continuing their advance into China. This obviously alarms China, who starts to reallocate their troops elsewhere. Reallocation leads to a little bit of a fall, and they end up abandoning a pretty large area of the US over here, but they don't completely pull out because that would be stupid. So after the blue team is able to kick the Laos and Cambodians out of their country, they then start to advance into these two countries, wiping them out with ease. they're not very strong. But it's too late for them to go back up north because China has come crashing back down. Elsewhere, we see an increasement of troops putting over into Central Asia. So now we need to ask ourselves the question, how does this really end? I'm gonna be honest with you, I've already recorded this video once. The reason that didn't get posted is because my microphone wasn't recording me. So that sucked. But at this point, I could see my microphone bar moving. We're good. And I realize now that this video is going to be a lot shorter than the other one. And that's because I know exactly how I want to end this. So in Central Asia, the US continues to see success in pushing back against the Chinese. They enter into the Xinjiang province and even see success in pushing back the PRC up north. Down south, though, their front line does start to wane as China is able to liberate large areas of their own country. But after weeks of no movement on either side and the continued digression of public support for the war, the two sides will decide to meet in Mongolia to discuss a possible peace treaty. So let's go ahead and take a look at said possible peace treaty. Alright, so let's go ahead and break down this peace treaty here. So I'm trying something new here where I'm leaving the colors that the teams were kind of faded so you can see the differences in the borders. If you're colorblind, then this might not work. I'm not really sure how that works, but anyway, we can see the new borders of Russia. So if I just go ahead and change the opacity, you can see this is what it used to look like and this is what it looks like now. I kind of do like a halfway in between. You can see the old borders and see how it progressed to this. So this goes with every single country, at least every country that was affected. You can see how Belarus was partitioned. It used to look like this and then it turned into that. So yeah, I wanted to give Poland all of its old land back, and you can see that I kind of drew the border up here with Lithuania. But the issue is that then Lithuania would get no land out of it and the border would look horrible. Like that's really not pretty at all. That looks horrible. So yeah, that's my best solution there. Everyone gets a little bit. I think Poland gets the most, and then the US gets the second most, and then Ukraine, and then you can see the rest. So now to Kazakhstan, who got their hair cut a little bit too short. They look like they have seen better days. I'm not too sure how stable Kazakhstan is in real life, but I can't imagine it's great, and I don't imagine this is helping them at all. Now down to the Middle East, we can see that Syria does still exist. However, they're probably wishing they weren't because, I mean, poor Syria, they're left with just their southern part, which arguably, you know, their capital's down there, so it could be worse. But Israel gets all of Lebanon and Turkey takes a bite out of Syria. And then finally, we look over here at East Asia. Not too much changes here. Siam is back under the rule of Vietnam. Taiwan is officially independent. We have Korea taking over North Korea, but China also does get a little bit out of North Korea. That's just so you know, they don't feel like they lost. I mean, it's whatever. South Korea was okay with it. And we also see that the US kindly cedes over this part of themselves to China to give them access to the Sea of Japan. So the stalemate works for both sides, you know. The losers lose and the winners win. China was able to do good stuff against the US over here, so they get a little bit of land, whereas the US and friends were able to do good stuff down here, so Siam is back and Taiwan is independent. And yeah, so that is going to do it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like on it, show some support. We're trying to get the 200K by the end of this year. Thank you guys for watching. Sorry, that's such an abrupt ending, but I will catch you guys in the next video. And of course, thank you to all the super fans. This includes Mr. Bonk7, Patrick Clauser, Switzerland Lowell Productions, German Edits, Georgie Badev, Kylie Speaks Plays, HammerToad45, Connor the Gamer, Poland Country Ball, Yakko, Nevada Garbage Trucks, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.